I think he's presenting a good example to Canadians that when you're, feeling certain symptoms, you have to be careful and you have to go into self-isolation. Meanwhile, I'm confident that things will go, smoothly.
The Prime Minister's in-person meeting with the country's premiers in Ottawa was abruptly called off today. That's after Justin Trudeau's wife, Sophie Gregoire Trudeau, started to experience flu-like symptoms. The Prime Minister and his wife are now in self-isolation, until test results confirm whether she's been inflicted with the coronavirus. The pandemic was expected to top the First Minister's meeting agenda after the feds announced $500 million for provinces and territories to fight COVID-19's spread. So what now, especially for Alberta, a province that was coming to the table with probably the biggest ask? And Alberta Premier Jason Kenney joins us now in studio. Hi, Premier. Thanks for coming in. I appreciate it.
Good to be here.
I know the meeting is canceled in person today. Any update on whether the meeting by phone will take place and at what
I'm told
point?
there will likely be a conference call with premiers and the Prime Minister tomorrow. I guess the Prime Minister is at home in isolation. And I certainly hope there'll be a call because goodness knows we have a lot of very important things to talk about.
Let me ask you about that. I want to ask you about what Alberta's doing as far as coronavirus is concerned, but let's start on what the ask is. I know that there's a couple of tracks here. Let me start with the healthcare track. They announced $500 million. Do you know what Alberta's portion of that is or what the need is from your province at this point?
Well, I can tell you that our initial budget for responding to coronavirus was $80 million based on the level of infection and preparedness to this point. But Vashti, we start to see some of these projections. I mean, Minister Matt Hadji said yesterday, potential 30 to 70% infection rate. I think that's becoming the standard amongst epidemiologists in the United States. It's hard to imagine that we would avoid the level of infection in the United States, even with very robust public health measures. So that is very big, and it's clearly like $500 million for all the provinces. Let's say that's done on a per capita basis. That would be about $60 million for Alberta. We've already exceeded that. Yesterday, to put this in perspective, the British government brought in their budget, which I believe had £17 billion, or like 30 billion Canadian dollars, just for the public health portion of this, not for the economic response to it. So that's probably more in the scale of what we should be looking at in Canada.
So is it fair for me to say that you would be asking the federal government for more where the public health side is concerned?
Well,
and they've already announced?
Oh, yes. I will just be diplomatic about this and say that yesterday or this week's announcement from the federal government was just an initial commitment, but
they're saying that, to be fair. I mean, they are saying this is the first announcement, but you're saying for sure you're going to need more.
Yeah, unless this thing suddenly stops cold in its tracks, and that would be contrary to the science, then there will be, just the public health crisis alone, without dealing with the economic impact of it, we're talking, I'm sure, well north of $10 billion, at least in Canada. And
the portion that you would need of that? Any estimation?
Well, I'm saying,
I know it's
we don't have those projections yet. Again, if the bottom end of the spectrum that we're now talking about in North America is true 30%, we're talking there about 1 million Albertans being infected prospectively.
What about the economic impact? And this is a conversation that you've been having for a long time with the federal government. You met with Deputy Premier Chrystia Freeland. I had her on the show last night. I asked her repeatedly if, for example, the ask you've made around fiscal stabilization will be a part of the budget, or if there's something directed at Alberta coming before that. I wasn't able to get any specifics.
I saw the interview, and I thank you for following up with your questions yesterday.
Well, now I'm going to follow up with you. Do
Sure.
you have any assurances from the federal government that money is coming in any capacity?
No.
And why do you think that is?
Look, all I can say is we got all 13 provinces and territories on side endorsing Alberta's request for a retroactive lifting of the fiscal stabilization payments, and obviously prospective as well, because we're going to be taking a massive hit on revenues again for the second time in 5 years. We've made that point very clear to the Government of Canada, and it's become radio silence on that front. Now,
even today with Minister Freeland?
We didn't get into that today. We were talking about the public health crisis. Minister Morneau did speak with my finance minister, Travis Toews, today and earlier this week. and indicated that there will be a response to a number of the critical issues we're facing in Alberta in the upcoming budget. And we obviously, that's one of the reasons I came here, was to emphasize the need for that, because we are facing a unique vulnerability. The whole Canadian economy is going to be facing a downturn tied to coronavirus. On top of that, we're facing a collapse in oil prices that will massively damage our economy and our fiscal health. And on top of that, we're riding 5 years of economic instability and fragility in the province. So we are in a uniquely vulnerable situation.
Let me ask you something, because I've been reading all these articles lately that sort of try and describe your tone and the way in which you're talking about these issues. Do you think you've ever gone too far or been too antagonistic towards the federal government where this stuff is concerned? I mean, you've basically accused them of, at times, and I am paraphrasing, I'm not quoting you directly, but it seems like you're saying, you guys are ruining the economy here. It's your fault.
Well, look, I have to speak frankly for the people I represent, and I think it's absolutely true that the 5 years of economic fragility, which has put us in a uniquely vulnerable position now, is in part because of federal policies. And you and I have talked about these things before. And I'll just give you an example. Like right now, we have the federal government moving forward with methane regulations that could force our energy companies to spend billions of dollars in new equipment, clean fuel standards, billions more, new plastics regulations that could jeopardize tens of billions of dollars of prospective new investment in the petrochemical industry that I've been working on. So,
but aren't they trying to balance a set of ideals that they've put forward that matters to them around climate
I
with
sure.
the economic interest that you're talking about?
Sure, and I just spoke to the C.D. Howe Institute here in Ottawa, and I said I recognize they were elected with a different mandate than me, and we share the commitment to reducing carbon emissions, and we think we've got a very good a model of success broadly on Indigenous reconciliation in Alberta, and those are the things I've been trying to get into a dialogue with them about since we came to office last May. I told the Prime Minister I was open to the 100 megaton cap on emissions and a $30 levy on major emitters that we brought in, and et cetera. But my point is now, surely all of this requires a fresh look. The notion of imposing new costs on an industry which is on life support right now. I mean, we've seen most of our mid-sized energy companies lose 90% of their share value. Most of them are a negative cash flow. We are looking at prospectively large-scale layoffs, significant numbers of bankruptcies. I'm simply saying, do no harm. And by the way,
but don't you think by the way,
I would say to folks who are single-mindedly obsessed with carbon emissions, congratulations. You're going to see the largest single decline in CO2 emissions from the Canadian and global economies in at least a couple of decades. Give us some breathing space to survive.
Let me ask you, though, do you honestly think that that's not resonating with them? Because I will say that
I hope it is.
It appears to me like it is. Like they constantly come on and they're talking about the significance of the sector and how much it's being hit. Minister Freeland saying, I'm talking to Secretary Pompeo, we're talking about how to protect the industry. The rhetoric is not, single-mindedly focused on reducing emissions. I feel like there is, because of the atmosphere right now, a different understanding.
Well, listen.
Can you give them that?
I've had I will certainly grant Chrystia Freeland seems as somebody who was born and raised in Alberta as perhaps a different understanding of the centrality of the energy industry, and we've had some good conversations. What we have not yet seen is that reflected in policy. I've been trying. Please understand, Vasi, people in that I represent are running out of time. They're running out of patience. And my message is simply this. This is not regional grievances. This is not, I'm not bringing an Alberta begging bowl to Ottawa. This is the largest subsector of the Canadian economy. It is by far our largest export industry. It is like 50% more energy that we export than autos and auto parts. This is, Bill Morneau is going to be briefed, I'm sure, this week on how badly a downturn in energy prices affects the fiscal health of the national government. I could go on. The point is, I'm not just here special pleading for Alberta. This is a national urgency. In the same way we did extraordinary things for the auto sector in 2008, we need the same kind of attitude towards the energy sector and the jobs that it represents.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.